Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 2nd, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Is everybody ready for more fun with Latin toponyms? Because we've got a Latin toponym for you today. The document of the day has at the top of it a header. It's Episcopi der Tusen. Maybe dare to sensi, dare to sensi? I can't quite figure out what the macron stands for over dare to sen. And it took a little doing and the help of the AI chatbot. And I found out that dare to sen is the Latin toponym for Tortosa. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, if you say dare to send Tortosa, you're kind of making similar noises, but it is not as intuitive as some of the other Latin toponyms out there. So, goes to show that sometimes there's a dramatic difference between the name of a place in Latin and the name of the place in the vernacular Catalan Tortosa. Tortosa is about halfway between Barcelona and Valencia, not really on the coast of the Mediterranean, but sort of within, I think, 60 kilometers. So if you're journeying along the coast from Barcelona to southward to, or I guess I should say southwestward to Valencia, once you hit that halfway point, you're kind of around where Tortosa is located. So today's document is about Tortosa. It is located in a register titled Diversorum, like diverse stuff, which I love because there's another register that's called Varia, for various. So I ask you, which kinds of documents would go into diverse things, and which kinds of documents would go into various things? I'm hoping to figure that out. But I will also say that as I was researching the archive of the Crown of Aragon and the history of the archive of the Crown of Aragon, I came across a historian named Udina y Martorell who wrote about the development of the archive under Per the Ceremonious and the ballooning of categories that Per wanted to have in the archive. And he said that the scribes and the chancery staff were sometimes just given tremendous headaches by trying to figure out which register a document should go into. So sometimes they're just as lost as the rest of us as to whether a document should go into one place or another. And that's not even talking about a document that might cover more than one thing. So there were registers dedicated to documents about Sardinia or documents about, say, another region, and so So basically, they had to figure out, well, if it overlaps, if a document is about more than one region, which one should it go into? And I think that they had some difficulties on a regular basis. Well, we have what we have. They made these decisions one way or another. And today's document is, I think, a pretty straightforward commission for the let's see, some kind of staff person in the bishop's office, I think. I don't think it's for the bishop himself. So the person's name is on the first line, so that makes things pretty easy to figure out. Arnaldo Torrelles. Pretty easy to read on that first line. And then we get some other information about another fellow named Raimundo Barbera. And it's really hard to understand what's going on because I identify this as something that's not really connected directly to my focus of study, and I'm not going to take the entire afternoon to go through and transcribe and translate this Latin document. But I will just note a couple things, and if something resonates later on in the research process, I'll come back and give this one more attention. One thing that I notice right away is that in the fourth line after the salutem et gratiam, there's a sentence that begins at the end of that line and goes on to the next, in which basically Joan here is referring back to an earlier document dated the 13th of January. So yesterday's podcast, we had an update to a document in another register, and in that situation, the scribes felt that it merited squeezing the message in to the space that's typically empty space between the different entries of letters in that register. And here we've got a reference to the earlier document, and I don't think they went back and squeezed in anything in the January 13th entry, because those are really, they're quite noticeable when the scribe does that. And I'm not saying I flipped through every page of every register, but I don't know. This is just another way of connecting across time that we can see happening in the registers. Maybe they did squish it in somewhere and I just missed it, but suffice it to say, we've got a reference to an earlier document in this letter. And then further down, something else that stuck out to me toward the bottom of the first page of this document, 7 lines from the bottom, we have a sentence about this Raimundo Barbera, and it seems like he might have to pay a really hefty fine for something. So we've got at the beginning of that line, continuing from above, Raimundo Barbera, sob pena 1000 florin, or floris auri, probably flori, mili flori auri, for something. So I think that this Raimundo Barbera might be a problem, some kind of way that he's causing some trouble. Or it could be that if someone gets in the way of Raimundo Barbera doing what he is supposed to be doing, then they are going to have to pay the 1,000 gold florins. So there's some heft behind this document, that's for sure, because that is a whole lot of money. That's what I know about this document. There were not a lot of documents written on February 2nd, I will confess. February 2nd in 1387 was a Saturday, and I'm trying to figure out if I can notice patterns of when it's hard to find documents on a particular day or easy, and associating that with the day of the week. And I'm not quite there yet. I haven't quite noticed any patterns. Like, I think there was a Saturday where there were tons of documents written, and likewise for Sunday. So I'll see what emerges as we get further into this project. I do know that we have at least one document from each day of the year from Joan, because Daniel Girona y Agostera wrote the itinerary for Joan and has linked a document to every single day. And that's where I got today's document from. I was flipping through some of the usual registers that have the more interesting letters, and there didn't seem to be anything for February 2nd, so I used my backup plan of that itinerary, and this is what was listed there. So that's where today's document comes from. Something else that I want to touch on is that right below the end of this document that we looked at today on folio 20R, there's a header that intrigued me. Domina Regina Siciliae, the Queen of Sicily. So the story of Sicily is one that has a lot of threads to it. And I will summarize a couple salient things about Sicily here. This letter is actually for February 3rd, so we could do it tomorrow, but now I'm in the opposite problem where I've got two interesting letters, and I'm going to actually choose the other one so we're going back to Violante tomorrow. Now, let's talk about Sicily. Sicily at this time had kicked out the authorities from the Crown of Aragon. Sicily at this exact moment is ruled by, it seems like, a oligarchy. Maybe, I think it was 4 lords who kind of maybe split up and power shared Sicily. Sicily had been conquered. Well, okay, wait, hold on, step back. Sicily was not conquered by the Crown of Aragon. There was a rebellion in Sicily against Angevin rulership, and the Crown of Aragon was invited in order to replace the hated Angevins. And so what happened was that Sicily became a part of the Crown of Aragon, but at times it was really pushing back. The leadership in Sicily was growing uncomfortable with the arrangement, and by the time we get to 1381, the authorities from the Crown of Aragon are essentially kicked out. The Queen of Sicily referred to in this letter is named Maria, and she is the granddaughter of Per the Ceremonious, from Per the Ceremonious's first wife. So this is not Joan's sister that we're talking about here, but half-sister. The woman that Per married before he married Joan's mother, they had a daughter named Constance. Constance married the King of Sicily, if I've got that correctly. And then their daughter was Maria, who in 1387 is the Crown of Aragon's choice to be called the Queen of Sicily. As an interesting twist, I've talked about this once before on the podcast. When Joan in 1380 was, and actually leading into 1380, 1379, 1380, looking for who he was going to marry after his first wife, Mata d'Armagnac, had died, and he eventually chose Violante de Bar. Per's father wanted him to marry this same Maria, who is about the same age as Violante, actually. But it's Pere's granddaughter. So Pere the Ceremonious wanted his son from one marriage to marry his granddaughter from another marriage, which Joan did not want to do, but we would like to think that Joan's objection was consanguinity, like marrying a close relative, but it was more that he wanted a French wife. So it seems like, a kind of double problem here from Joan's point of view. First, she's not French. And I don't know in Joan's mind if it was like an equal problem or a lesser problem that it was his father's granddaughter. So, yeah. So Joan went against his father's wishes and married Violante de Bar, and that's when Pere the Ceremonious writes that poem saying, "You're making a dreadful mistake." The reason why Pere the Ceremonious wanted Joan to marry Maria, Queen of Sicily, was to solidify the Crown of Aragon's hold and rule over Sicily, which was a problem. And that problem became worse in the next year, in 1381, when Maria was actually kidnapped and then ransomed back to Pere and was then in exile out of Sicily. So in 1387, Joan is writing to the Queen of Sicily, who's not in Sicily. She's in exile. I don't exactly know where she is, but maybe in Barcelona. I don't know. What happens a little bit down the road into the future is that Martí has his son, who's also named Martí, marry Maria, Queen of Sicily. So what's kind of confusing is that Martí, the elder, is married to Maria de Luna, and Martí, the younger, is married to Maria of Sicily. So two couples named Martí and Maria, parent generation and child generation. So that makes for some confusing history writing. And then what happens is Martí, the elder, along with Martí the younger and Maria of Sicily, they all go to Sicily in 1392 with a whole lot of military force, and they reassert the control, the rule over Sicily, and it actually stays under the rule of the Crown of Aragon for a while. So at least 10 more years, maybe further down the road. But then, even more complications come up because of people dying. Martí the younger actually dies before Martí the elder. And so it's all just, there's no lack of complication in this story of the Crown of Aragon and Sicily. But that gives you a little introduction to how complicated it got. All right, so now you know a little bit more about the relationship between the Crown of Aragon and Sicily and how Martí is connected into all of that. And this moment in this register, we see Joan reaching out to the Queen of Sicily, maybe doing something like, "Hey, I haven't forgotten you, and, we're going to try to restore you to your throne." By this time, the Queen of Sicily, Maria, is actually not yet married to Martí the Younger. They get married in 1390. So that's cooking. And but not done yet. All right. Woo. Hopefully you were able to keep up through all that. My goodness, I almost feel like I need to make another kind of like Sicily family tree, But that family tree that I made already, that took a long time. So I don't know. That's going to have to be a project for later. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, and maybe the questions are not even about the document of the day, and they're about this very confusing history of Sicily, well, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.